Loki IRL is a webcomic created by the new hit sensation that makes me want to commit castration, Pan Pizza. The webcomic focuses on Bianca, a young girl who dreams of being a famous cartoonist in a world filled with people and IRLs, or cartoons in real life. First off, gotta come out of the woodworks on this one. The fact that Pan Pizza made a world where fucking a drawing of a dog is alright is pretty nice. After the introduction that was episode 1, episode 2 starts to get a bit more into the deeper plot of Loki IRL, placing a bigger focus on the fourth wall, a cult with uncertain motives, as well as the namesake of the comic, Loki Lowbrow Sinister. Loki is a techno street punk gangster with an affinity for bad one-liners and a possible BDSM fetish. We're also introduced to characters like Chupo, the possible leader of the fourth wall and clan member, as well as Katrina Gutierrez, a blogger and a skeleton. That is too much porn to count. Characters are one of the things it feels that Pan understands best. At least the fact that they're the primary motivator of a story. If we don't understand them and their motivations in life, then why should we care about them? For both Loki and Bianca, it's the idea of recognition and fame that power them. For Chupo and the rest of the fourth wall, it's a bit more of a mystery, but this adds to the allure of them. Who are they? What do they want? Can they see why kids love the taste of Cinnamon Toast Crunch? All questions we keep reading to figure out. Another major factor that defines a character is the way they talk and their lexicon. I feel one of the things that separates good writers from bad when it comes to character interactions is whether or not they understand this concept. And for the most part, it feels like Pan does. Chupo has a foghorn leghorn way of speaking, while Milky Mint talks in a very posh manner. However, at times, the dialogue can be pretty choppy and unnatural sounding. For example, there's a moment where Loki just gets fucking shot and he says, "It hurts. This is real." Now, the meaning of this is easy to understand. Throughout the entire chapter, Loki is acting as he's invincible, because he doesn't recognize that he's weaker in the real world. This is him recognizing that he's completely wrong. The problem with this is, and the way it's framed, this doesn't feel like something any sane person would say. I think what makes this even more awkward is how in the first panel, Loki is actively frowning, and appears to be shaking, though these could just be the sketch marks that accentuate IRLs. However, in the second panel, he appears to be smiling, which just makes the statement all the more awkward, almost as if he actually enjoys the pain. Maybe I wasn't too far off with that BDSM joke after all.
Well, bring out the gimp.
Among this, sometimes the dialogue just feels choppy in its pacing. Now, I hear you saying,
Slayer, how can dialogue have pacing? Especially since the reader directs the pacing with how fast they read a comic.
Good question, faithful compatriots. Unless that wasn't you. Then I have no idea where that question came from. It is true that the reader does direct the pace, for the most part. However, depending on how things are laid out, that pacing can be steered towards certain patterns, especially with things like dialogue. A great example of this is when Chupo pulls out a gun to shoot Loki. Everything about this page just reads cleanly. The top of the page has your basic left to right placement of dialogue. However, it's when we move down the page that the layout gets a bit more interesting, with the visage of Chupo overlaying the bottom two widescreen panels. Since the white strongly contrasts with the rest of the page, our eye is instantly drawn there, but it's then pulled back towards the right due to Loki's laughter, with its green text contrasting against the white, which then pulls us down to the last speech bubble. On the sketchier side of things, however, we have moments like when Bianca first gets hit. Right after she gets hit, Loki says, "harming a child," which she then follows up by saying, "most dishonorable." While this would naturally flow together like one of those cool anime quips, they're divided up by Bento yelling at Yanni. Because of this, these two phrases are broken up in a way that it's just awkward to read. Had Loki's speech bubble been moved lower on the panel to give it less precedence than Yanni's, this whole part would flow a lot better. However, it isn't just in the dialogue that Loki IRL has problems with its flows, and I'm not talking about Loki's raps either. A lot of episode 2 feels like it's missing panels, which just makes the flow of the whole episode feel choppy, especially since this one has more energy and movement than the prior one. The most notable example of this is when Rocco is running through the cafe after he's stolen Loki's binder. In one panel, Bianca's right behind him chasing him through a crowd, and then in the next panel, Rocco is tripping up some stairs. There are two problems here. One, how did Bianca fall so drastically behind after catching up on him as much as she had? And two, the staircase Rocco trips up is never established prior to him tripping. Now, in the panel prior to this, there is a staircase in the background. The problem is that isn't the staircase Rocco trips up. The staircase he trips up is in a separate room. This makes reading between these two pages feel jerky and awkward. Another weird pacing moment is when Bianca stabs Yanni in the hand, and he slams her into the ground. It jumps from him being stabbed in the hand to her being directly on the ground. As much as I feel children's everyone should be put in their place by any means possible, this time it feels a bit rushed. It feels Powerpuff Girls inspired, but without the energy of that show. If it had a reactionary in between, I feel this moment would be a lot more solid and fulfilling, something I feel bogs down a lot of episode 2, especially in its action scenes. Action is dictated by energy, much like how my jokes are dictated by how well I can cram them into my reviews. Loki IRL has a weird relationship with energy in its action scenes. How Loki IRL tends to display this energy is through blur lines, which admittedly look really nice and represent the energy decently. However, these aren't always present, and when they are, they sometimes don't feel dramatic enough to convey the motion in the panel. It feels like it needs more variety and motion lines in its movement to help convey this energy that Pan is trying to illustrate. Another thing that dictates the energy of a character in their actions is how they posture themselves. I think one of the most excellent examples of this is Spike of Cowboy Beep Boop. His posture is very lax and slumped over. This plays into his action scenes by creating a very effortless and carefree overtone to his movements and actions. Similarly, Loki seems to fight with a lot of cockiness and bravado, which causes a lot of his movements to be over-exaggerated and grand, though this does seem to take a toll on the art, which I'll talk about here later. In other characters though, I feel this energy is missing. For example, in this panel, Bent Over is wielding what appears to be a pipe. What's weird about this is how low he's holding it. While it makes sense in that it helps establish the pipe better, it lacks energy, which makes the following panel, while it looks nice, lack impact. If the pipe were held up just a bit higher, I feel this would give us enough of a visual of it to understand it, as well as to give it the energy it needs to carry out the following panel. To return to what I was saying earlier about the art, the characters they have some bad anatomy. Now, that's not to say the designs are bad. I honestly think that's one of Pan's strong suits. He can make some really unique and interesting designs. However, when put in action, their anatomy can be kind of inconsistent. Look at the Asian persuasion herself, Bianca. This is something I brought up last time, but I feel it's even more prevalent here. Her legs change sizes and lengths almost non-stop. The same could be said about her face, which lacks consistency to the point where she almost looks like a Charlie Brown character at one point. This lack of consistent anatomy is a humongous detriment to the comic, to the point where it ruins a lot of action scenes. Just look at this page where Loki is hitting people. The inconsistency of the anatomy makes these action scenes feel overly stiff, with the only saving grace here being this neat little panel break that occurs right here. Another example of this is the Hurricane Touchdown. I don't know what I'm looking at here. Is he breaking his own neck? Is this the concept art for Teen Boat? What makes this panel worse, or what I initially assumed to be shadows in the background? However, after looking at them, it quickly becomes apparent that this is supposed to represent Loki's path of movement. But since they're black in color, with the only other color being the purple from his cloak, something that isn't even present in his final frame of movement, this idea isn't conveyed very well. I feel that if these were replaced with blurred versions of Loki with all of his colors, this would work far better. Looking at Loki even further, it feels like he was a character that was designed from a side view, with other perspectives being a second thought. I say this because anytime the perspective on him isn't a side view, the dimensions on his face become really awkward. I think the biggest indicator of this is his mouth thing, which juts out on the opposite end of the camera anytime he's shown at a 3/4 view. This is really weird because it doesn't do the same thing on the side of the audience, creating an imbalance in the design that detracts from what would otherwise be some of the best panels in the comic. And that's not even mentioning Loki's basic form. It's Also, Pan, that's not how boobs work. Same with this perspective. It feels like there are 3 different perspectives crammed together in the same shot. You have what I consider the main perspective, which Katrina and Milky Min apply to. Then you have the sticker perspective, where characters and objects look like they were just pasted on top of the image. And then you have the skater perspective, where it looks like this curve strip is looking to set up for a sick kickflip. There's a lot of inconsistency found within Loki IRL, and I'm not talking about plot inconsistency either. I mean, it's only been 2 episodes. We're not talking about Hirohiko Araki here. What I mean is there's a tendency for objects to change sizes and shapes at near random intervals. I think the masks are the best example of this. In this first panel, they're more rectangular and blocky, but the panel that directly follows, they become more rounded and curved. Then in the next page, they become much smaller, to the point where they wouldn't even cover Yanni's face, which becomes flat for some reason after he's put on the mask, something that's admittedly remedied much later in the episode. But now is the moment of truth. Is it funny? I like some of the jokes. I think the joke where Bianca's like, "Drats, my virginity is safe yet again," and the Banksy joke are both really funny. And I feel the JFK style joke is a nice nod to fans of the podcast. But I feel this leads to the biggest issue of Loki IRL's humor. Is it funny if you don't know who Pan Pizza is? And to be honest, I don't think so. I think it's funny because I get Pan's timing. I get the way he speaks, I understand how his jokes work. But if you've never watched any of his videos, I don't think you'd get it. Like, look at the asexual joke. I think nearly everyone who's read this panel has probably done so with Pan's voice in mind. Or at least that's how it was with me and everyone I know who's read the comic. I feel like Loki IRL would work a lot better as an animation because of things like this. It would at least be funnier because the timing would be there. But without this preconceived notion of Pan's timing, the jokes just become a lot weaker all of a sudden. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of good things in episode 2, because there are. Some panels look fantastic because of Pan's character designs and the way he uses his colors, which usually look great, though there are times where text and characters can get a little lost in the background. Episode 2 is definitely an improvement on the first episode. It's much more visually interesting, and the background designs are much better. I want to see Loki IRL improve with time. I want to see where the plot goes from here. I want to see whether or not Pan will play around with the idea of Loki coming to terms with the fact that he's an IRL, something that feels hinted at throughout the episode, which, in all honesty, is the concept that has me most intrigued. But there are a lot of problems here that need to be fixed before I consider the comic to be better than okay. Would I recommend Loki IRL? If you're a fan of Pan Pizza, then yes. But if you have no idea who this pizza is or what toppings he comes with, then no. Not yet. Stay tuned for next week where I don't release a video because I'm too busy rewatching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's sure to be exciting.
Drop dead, but I